Risk Chats with AFERM. I'm your host, Paul Marshall. Today we're speaking with Jacki Ponti-Lazaruk from USDA Rural Development. She's the Chief Risk Officer. And we'll be focusing on the importance of communications for an enterprise risk management program. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today we have Jacki from USDA. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, and we're happy to have you here today, and we thought we'd talk a little bit about your role over at USDA, but also I think our main topic for today is just communication, and we'll really get into some details, but I think that's a good topic for today. So if you don't mind, Jacki, just give us a little bit of your background and what you do over at USDA.
Hi, I'd be happy to. My name is Jacki Ponti-Lazaruk, and I am the Chief Risk Officer for USDA Rural Development. We're a agency who provides loans and grants and technical assistance to rural communities across the country. And we have a portfolio of about $240 billion that we manage, and we lend about $28 billion each year.
Wow. Okay. So I'm sure there's some definite risk areas that you all have to consider over there, or that kind of volume or size. So tell us a little bit about your philosophy on how communication makes a successful program for risk management.
Yeah, when I took the job as the risk officer, I was coming out of 12 years of running programs. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I felt was really important was that we make sure that everyone at every level in the organization understood why we existed and what value it might bring to them.
Right.
So communication was a cornerstone of all of our planning from the very beginning, mm-hmm. and we've kept that going for the last 2 years, and I think it's helped us along the way.
So when you started off, did you actually come up with a plan or something formal, or was it just something you knew you had to incorporate communications into this?
Well, throughout my career, I've held a lot of senior jobs, and whether it was, running policy shops or, doing IT efforts, we always had a communication plan. So it felt natural to create one from the beginning. It evolved over time, but it included a variety of methods to communicate with staff and really kind of understanding why and when we needed to be talking to various parts of the agency.
Mm-hmm. So, and for USDA, so did you all start from the top or start from the bottom approach? What was the...
Yeah, I think most ERM stand-ups start with their senior executives. Mm-hmm. And in our agency, before I was hired, our senior leadership had done a series of kind of get to understand ERM, mm-hmm. which was nice in the year before. So there was some general knowledge that this was coming and what it was. But my colleagues, when I left the ranks of running programs and moved to the risk shop, really wanted to understand better what it meant. Mm-hmm. And we did. We started with the senior leadership. And we, at the same time, began efforts to create messaging products for the general staff.
Right.
We have a pretty active staff. They're very interested in what's going on in the national office. They're distributed all across the country. And so we began with a series of webinars for them. Just to, and we use those same webinars with little modifications for senior leadership, then for the managers at the national office and across the field, and then for staff. And one of the things I really liked about what we did was we were able to make them interactive, and we collected data about their understanding mm-hmm. throughout the presentation, and at the end we asked them, did you understand what we talked about? And they were honest with us. Some of them said they didn't, but It allowed us to recalibrate each time we did a new webinar. We would incorporate that feedback in and see if we could get those scores a little bit higher.
Right. So I'm wondering, what were some of the things that folks didn't really understand? Is it some of the lexicon or just the concepts or what? So
one of the things that I drilled into, I started, it was just me and my assistant and a couple of contractors. Mm-hmm. But as we brought some folks on, the most important thing to me was that people could understand what it was. Right. I find the biggest mistake we make as practitioners of ERM is we use all of the lingo. And these are people who are professionals and they're smart folks, but they don't have the time to learn our lingo. So we put everything into regular words, right? Straight talk, and try to put it in as easy and understand format as possible. And so when we talked about the risk taxonomy, we just talked about buckets of risk. How are we going to talk about risk, and what buckets are we going to put it in, right? When we talked about the lexicon, we said, this is just our terms. This is how we're going to, here are the words we're going to use, and you're going to help us define. They understood definitions because they write regulations. This is your definitions portion of your regs. So they got those things. So we took extra care in the beginning to really put it in their language. So they didn't have to become experts in ours.
Right. And I like the fact that you have that feature where people can actually, go to your webpage and provide feedbacks directly. So, and do you find that people provide just questions, or is it actual risks they'll put in there? I mean, what kind of things are you getting?
It's a little mix of everything. So we did create a SharePoint site with a place for them to learn more about what we were doing, but we also have a real quick little form where they can submit a question, a comment, or a risk. We have gotten some risks through that site, and one of the things we've asked at each of our outreach events, or just when we're talking to people, is if you raise a risk, please provide as much information as you can. And we have an attachment button so they can upload documents, and they are.
Oh, wow.
They are.
So I want to go back to something I talked to you before. You mentioned an analogy about a parlor.
Oh, yeah.
Explain that a little bit. I thought that was a great analogy for communications.
Thank you. Yeah, when I try to explain to others what I do, I often will say to them, my job is to get my programs in my agency to invite me into their family room. And they always kind of tilt their head, and I say, well, look, I grew up in a house. My mom had a front room that was clean. There were 5 kids in our family, and nothing else was quite as orderly as that front room, and it's where she received visitors. That was the place where no pets, no kids, no nothing could go into that space.
Right.
And that is where, as agencies and programs, as we're running things, when people come in to assess us, that's where we take people. We want them to see our best self. When you're trying to, from the inside in an enterprise risk management program, help programs identify their risks and fix them, address them, or lean into them, whatever it is, they have to show you where the toys are strewn out, or where they have, a basket of laundry. It's that back family room that you want to get into. And to get there, they have to trust you. You have to be invited.
So, right, and that's something I think folks really want to know how to do. I mean, so what was your approach to get invited back there to get that information,
Well, I had an advantage in my position because I had come from the program side. So I knew a lot of the people. I had built relationships with them. Not everybody did trust us coming in. Not everybody wants to take you to the back. I still have some program areas who worry. It doesn't mean I don't know what's going on in those program areas, because we have data and we look at things, but we continue to work with them. It is a long-term game. The idea is to build those relationships, get them comfortable, and continuously show them that you can provide them value. Always, always, always show how you're going to help them.
Right. So, so as far as formally putting together, your risks and gathering them, because you're pretty, you have folks all over the country, I'm assuming, all over the place. So again, it's a communication issue, but how, what mechanism do you use to gather all the inputs that you need,
We've used a variety of them, and we're evolving. We're only just shy of 2 years old, so we're evolving. In our first year, we did a lot of survey work and a lot of outreach. We did, I traveled. There are a variety of trainings that are hosted by program areas, or we have a great employee association. They host zone meetings and annual meetings, and we just tried to merge in wherever there were gatherings and talk to people and document from there, and then begin to follow up in pursuit of things that began to show trends. We did have a formal survey process and this input through the SharePoint site, and then we did our own analysis. We looked at our audits, and we looked at data we had, and from that we began to shape our risk register. As we go into the next fiscal year, we're looking to firm up that cycle a little bit more and use some other tools. And so we're doing that planning now, and we're learning from others who have it, who have other ways of collecting. And that's one of the things I've really appreciated about the ERM community, is that it's a group of us who are all kind of in the same boat and willing to share so openly. And so we might have something that we might do really well that others, would like to hear about, and we're certainly asking to learn from others as we go through the process too. It's been great.
Very good. So another question about communications. Do you find that is it a different approach for executives versus staff, or what is it different, or is it both? We need to show the value, and how you approach it.
I think you always have to show the value. I do think that they have different concerns. So, I think ERM is as much about empathy and diplomacy as it is about getting to the facts and getting those risks out in the open. So I think if you can put yourself in their shoes, whoever they are, understand the pressures they're under, understand some of the things they might be concerned about coming to light, then you can have those conversations with them and really make them feel comfortable about it. Some of them will still be uneasy. I mean, it is a scary thing to put your risks on a piece of paper that you think might end up somewhere where somebody could, take action against your agency, or for goodness sakes, end up in the press.
Sure.
I find that our agency is full of really good, dedicated people, all trying to do the right things with whatever resources they're given. And so, having that understanding, explaining to them what your purpose is in being there, and living what you're telling them.
Right.
If you tell them you're going to keep something confidential, you must keep it confidential. You have to.
Of course. Yeah,
right?
Sure.
And I think people forget that sometimes.
Right. So I think also I want to talk about your role in the agency and how that has helped you to get the buy-in from everybody. So can you explain kind of who you report to, or what that organization looks like?
Sure. So when this position was created, the then undersecretary decided that it needed to be an SES position, which is great, and that it needed to report directly to her.
Right.
That gave it a weight that helped the ERM stand up from the beginning. It was clear it was a priority. It was clear it wasn't going anywhere. With OMB then following suit with their requirement for ERM in the agencies, it just kind of gave it that extra push that it needed.
Right.
I think when you take that and even with that, you still have to work those relationships, because at some point there's turnover. We had a transition of administrations, and the new administration, I'm lucky, has been fairly supportive of the process and has made decisions based on the risks we found. But it's a different construct, a different structure, and so we keep at it.
Right. So, and that's the fact that you're positioned that way makes things definitely easier for you. So, but how would you describe who's in the risk council, so to speak?
Yeah, so our Enterprise Risk Management Committee is a cross-section of career staff and political staff. And it starts with the assistant to the secretary, who's now the head of our agency, her chief of staff, and our COO, our CFO, myself. We have a new chief innovation officer, so that person is also in the room. And then we have 2 career SES program leads and 2 political appointee state directors who rotate on the committee in 2-year cycles. And I'm trying to remember if I'm missing any, but I don't think I am. It's grown from 8 to 11 with the new administration, because we added an innovation officer. Oh, the CIO was added as well.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And the idea was that these folks, when they come to these meetings, they are not representing their state, they are not representing their program. They are looking at the enterprise and trying to figure out what's the best thing to do. To have the CIO and CFO in the room is helpful, because they know what the boundaries are in terms of technology and money.
Right.
But their job is to also look as broadly as they can across the enterprise to figure out what's the best way to address things.
Right. So when you're having those meetings, at that point, are you really seeing, here's some actions we need to take, and or are you just kind of going over the list? Here's the list, but where are we on each list, or each item? I mean. So
it depends on the meeting, and actually, this past year we presented them with the risk register before we got together. We use a tool called Decision Lens, and we queue up all of the risks, and before they go in, and in that tool they can rate and rank the risks. Before that, we offer them the opportunity to, on their own, just read through all of the risk cards that we develop, which is, description of the risk, and then before they rate and rank them. Or we do multiple sessions where we just walk through and let them ask questions, kind of kick the tires on the risk and what data we have, and then they go in and prioritize. I also have a second group, and it is consisting of all of the other career SESs in the agency. They're my SES advisory group. They shadow everything that the ERMC does. And it serves two purposes. One, I always get the lens on where people think the priorities are for the people who are leading and running the programs beyond the ERMC. So I get that pulse there. But it also keeps them trained up, because they will be rotating on to the committee at some point. So when they merge on, it cuts down on training time and that transition. And so when they get to the committee, we're showing them the results of the rating and ranking, and then we talk about it. We look at the anomalies, we figure out whether or not this is really what we think it ought to be. And the session we just had before we finalized our risk profile, the committee decided which were the top tier risks, which were the second and third tier risks, and then we assigned leads for response. We decided which were the top 4 that needed response in the short term, and now we'll be working with the risk owners to develop the teams that are going to actually dig in and do the more detailed risk response.
Right. So since you have that that level of folks in the room, are you starting to see ERM coming into play more on budgetary decisions, strategic decisions?
It has, and I don't. It's a little chicken and egg. I don't know that it was ERM that drove it or that their processes drove it. For us, what was a helpful piece was that we had a reform effort that came through from the new administration.
Right.
And because we had our risk profile pretty well finished at the time we were supposed to be developing reforms, and I had flagged this for our acting undersecretary at the time and said, we really should think about building something beforehand so we have some ideas. And the leadership decided they wanted to go about it with the risk shop facilitating. So we used that as an opportunity to develop reforms that would address the risks we have, and developed a paper there. So when the new administration came in and was actually asking for deliverables on ideas, we had not only ideas, but they had been thought through from an operational standpoint and from a risk standpoint, and that was really helpful. We've done a lot of work to make sure we are integrated into the budget process. We've just stood up a new IT investment review board process with our new CIO, so we're integrated into that. And it's not we're on the committee, but we also have in there, when someone submits an investment, there's language that says, is this a risk? Is this addressing a risk? And trying to integrate in those ways. So
yeah, that sounds like very smart way to to make this successful, to integrate risk management into all these different initiatives and things that come up. It's not just, there's this ERM shop on the side over here, we gotta do these activities. You're really truly integrating.
Yeah, we don't want to be a separate function. They have to, they're busy enough. So this week we went back to we had done a kind of a grid on the wall. We were refining that, and it layers in all of the different processes and work that our program leads have to do throughout the year, including their regular program work, budget work, performance management work, all of that. Figured out that we actually can do fewer committee and ERM meetings if we integrate into the meetings they're already going to have, and tried to sequence when we had to have deliverables to support those other efforts. So that's what we're doing going into next fiscal year, is really trying to figure out and then reach agreement with all our colleagues who are the other leaders of these efforts, so that we're all going through the cycle together, but at different times each of us will lead a different piece of it. It's just we're all sharing as we go along. I'm hoping it'll work, and we're gonna try it. I'm fortunate. I have great colleagues, and so people are open to it, even if they're crazy busy. We're gonna try to make it work, and we'll see.
Well, and you said we want to be integrated with things that are going on, and you want continuous contact with folks as well. What are some other initiatives? I think you mentioned something about when I talked to you before. You're also involved in some of the and when the audits comes around.
Oh yeah. So my shop inherited the audit liaison function. We didn't start with that.
Right.
My original position was only the ERM function. So we now have continuous process improvement and the audit liaison function in the ERM shop. And it's great. It works out great because we're looking at those audits anyway. But one of the things that we have been able to do as we look at how we can better serve the programs on the audit side is show them that value that we can provide as a staff and building those relationships in that way. So all of us have been through audits, and it's a lot of work. It takes you away from your regular day-to-day work. Anything that can help you get to closure or get through the process easier is welcome. And so for my staff, we set a new standard of service this year, and we are providing assistance in drafting statements of actions. We're doing hard reviews on draft reports and really offering them a different lens to see what a reader might see, not just the technical corrections they might be looking for. We're giving them a little more advanced training and some tips and tools and really advocating for them in that process. And that's been helpful to us as we go through and build those relationships on the ERM side.
That's great. Because I was also wondering, how do you, such a large agency, how do you keep up with the most recent things that are happening or risks that may be emerging? I mean, do people come to you? Do you have to go out and find these things, or how do you, keep up with that?
A little bit of both, although we've been fortunate. If people are worried about stuff, they come and talk to us. Yeah, and that was, we set, and I didn't bring it with me, but I should have. We set a series of kind of core values for our office, which is our commitment to the programs. When I started, I said to them, one, I didn't want to create work that they didn't have to do, that we would try to minimize the impact on them from the work side. Two, that we would always be focused on getting real results, something tangible, or there was no purpose to us being.
Something else I wanted to ask you about was, now the program's been going on for how long at USDA? I'm sorry.
2 years.
2 years, that's right.
Yeah.
So, what do you see as the next big thing or evolution of the program you'd like to put into place?
So for us, next big thing is really building our capacity in our shop to do more data analysis. We're a small shop. Our agency is standing up a data analytics shop, and we hope to be a customer of them, but we really need to kind of build out what we're able to do in-house. This year we're also working on firming up the risk response methodology and making sure there's standardization across the agency as we're doing these things. Right.
Okay, so you actually do a lot more actual and analysis of data, not just depending on folks to send you things in. I mean, you're doing more proactive things.
Yeah. Yes, and we'll be doing a big, we're a bank, so we're looking at the portfolio itself and trying to figure out if the factors that we look at now in the portfolio are enough to identify those risks that might be emerging or that we might not be aware of.
Right. Okay. Well, and also I think you mentioned as far as back to the communication, so if you had some things you could share with others or ideas or even just a matrix or a plan for people that could use.
Yeah, when we began to look at how we might communicate, we made a grid, and I'm a rows and columns kind of gal, so across the top we looked at things like who is the audience for the communication we have, why are we talking to them, what's the purpose for it, what level of content do we want to have for them, is it kind of high level content, or is it much more detailed, how often, what's the cycle, how and the frequency, and then what delivery method would we use? Is it an email, is it a webinar, is it in person, just talking to people, and then along the other axis we listed who we needed to be talking to. There's senior leadership, but there's also program managers, there's staff in the field, there might be the Hill. Right. In my case, my job was created through language on the Hill as well, and so There's a loop back there, and OMB and others, to make sure they understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what's coming out of it.
Right. Okay. Well, then that's something we might be able to have a link on our site and
Sure.
give people a nice little template to look at. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Jacki, I appreciate you coming out today, and this was great. I was very happy to hear about USDA, what you guys are doing, and I think these communication techniques are essential for these programs to be successful. You have to talk to the right people, constant contact, and as you said, demonstrate value. So thanks again for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, that's our show. Thanks for tuning in. We have many more podcasts coming up soon. Also, the AFERM Summit is coming up. Hope you can attend. Until next time, this is your host, Paul Marshall, signing off for Risk Chats with AFERM.